Hello there. Today we'll be taking a look at Adobe Flash Professional. Flash Professional is used to create animations, to create mobile apps, to create games and prototypes. So we're going to see what we can make with it. So if you open up Flash, you'll probably be greeted with this welcome screen, and we have several different options. We can open an existing file. There's a link down here for templates, but if we want to create a new document, we would choose something from this column of options right here. So I'm going to create a new ActionScript 3 document. Okay, in here our interface is similar to the other Adobe products. We can grab any panel, like this Properties panel. I'll just grab it by the tab. I can make it a floating panel, or I can dock it anywhere in the interface where I might want it. Sometimes it can be a little stubborn. There we go. I can resize my panels. I can double click on a tab if I want to hide that panel. Some of the panels have this little double arrow up here. We can kind of collapse that panel down into an icon. And then we can click on that icon if we want our panel to kind of just pop out only when we need it. Of course, any panel can be closed. We can click on the X to close a panel. However, if you find yourself missing panels that you need, you can go find them up in Window. So if I want to bring back that Properties panel, we can find it under Window, Properties, and then I'll just dock it back over here. If you want to explore, there are several different preset interfaces up here. We can click on where it says, for me it says Essentials, and I can switch to a different preset. Since there are so many different things that we can make in Flash, it's really easy to kind of get overwhelmed with the options, especially the options just in the number of panels that we have. I'm going to switch to the Essentials layout here. So if you want your screen to look like mine, switch to Essentials. And the primary panels that you should note, we've of course have a toolbar, and it's docked over on the left right now. That's where all of our tools are. Over on the right we have a panel, a Properties panel, and the Properties panel changes based on what we currently have selected. So right now I have nothing selected, so the Properties panel is showing me all of the properties for the document, this particular project that I'm inside of. So since Flash is capable of making animations and interactive content, we have an option over here in Properties where it says frames per second. So right now mine is set to 24 frames per second. Maybe yours is defaulting to 12. It doesn't matter, just know that you can change the frame rate over here. We can also change the document size. By default, 550 by 400 is the size that Flash likes, but you can change that. And there are several other document-wide settings we can change over here. If we click on, say, this wrench, or we click on this wrench right up here, we can change more of the code settings. Not something you usually have to be concerned about, though. I'm going to change my document back to 550 pixels by 400 pixels. Hidden behind the Properties panel, we have a panel called Library. The Library panel allows us to store content that we can reuse multiple times. So I might have an image in here, a sound effect, and I can pull those out and put them onto the canvas. We will use the Library panel later. Down at the bottom we have a Timeline panel, and the Timeline panel is important. Obviously we've got frames, so as we go from left to right we increase in time. So this, the number at the top is the number of frames that have gone by, not the number of seconds. So if I could grab the playhead and move it over here to frame 20, that would be 20 frames forward in time, and since we are working at a frame rate of 24 frames per second, that would be not quite 1 second into our animation. It's important to know that the timeline is also where we do all of our layers management. So we don't have a dedicated panel just for layers. Instead, we come in here and at the bottom of timeline, we can click the new layer option to give ourselves as many layers as we want. Similarly, we can create folders down here. So if I want to select multiple layers, I can organize them into folders. We have the ability to nest folders inside one another. We can lock layers and we can lock folders as well. That little eyeball button allows us to hide certain layers, which is very helpful when you're working on intricate pieces and you don't want to accidentally edit the content on one layer while you're working on another. I'm going to delete most of my layers. I'll just select the folder and any other layers and I'll drag them down to the trash down here, and that will delete it. Another important panel that we'll need later is the Actions panel. The Actions panel is where we write all of our code that is attached to individual keyframes in our timeline. Okay, I want to introduce you to some of the tools we have in our toolbar. So I'm going to grab the brush tool. That's a keyboard shortcut B. If I want to change the size of that brush, I can do that over here as well. I can change the shape of the brush. We can also change the color of the brush. You'll find two swatches in the toolbar. One is for a stroke color and the other is for a fill color. The brush uses the fill color, so we can click on that swatch and choose from a whole bunch of other swatches. Flash is a vector environment, so as we use the brush tool, we're not actually changing the color of pixels in this canvas. What we're doing is we are creating shapes, special shapes called vectors. These vectors use points to define their overall shape. We can zoom in as much as we want and we'll never see individual pixels for these shapes. Instead, what I can do is I can grab this white arrow. It's called this sub-selection tool, and the keyboard shortcut is A, and I can select any shape to see the points that make up its perimeter. I can select those points and move them around if I want. Now these points are interpolated using Bezier curves. So if I select a point, I can grab the Bezier handles that come out of that point, and I can adjust how the curve passes through that point. This gives us great control over our vectors. I'm going to use the selection tool to drag a marquee over everything to select everything, and then hit delete to clear the canvas. The selection tool keyboard shortcut, by the way, is V. Now we have the ability of dropping in primitive shapes over here, so I'm going to select the oval tool and I'm going to select a stroke color. Oops, I want the stroke color to be different than the fill color. And I will drag out an oval. If I hold shift, it'll make a circle. And maybe you can't see it, but this circle does have a line that wraps all the way around it, and that line is the stroke color from over here. So I can, with my selection tool, I can select the circle, but I'm actually just selecting the interior of the circle. If I were to drag that, you'd notice that it leaves the stroke behind. If you want to select the stroke, you can use the selection tool to click on the stroke, and now we can see that it's selected. Over in the properties panel, you may have noticed that when I select a shape, I can change some of the properties of that shape. So with the stroke selected, I can change the stroke color. I can change the stroke size, and I can even change the stroke style. Right now I have solid. I can change that to, let's say, a ragged line. That looks kind of interesting. Similarly, I can select the fill, and I can change the fill color. I'm going to hit Control A to select all and then delete to delete, and I'm going to drag out that circle again. If I want to select the fill and the stroke at the same time, I can double click on the fill with the selection tool. So V, double click, and now both are selected. One unique aspect about Flash is that when shapes overlap one another, they actually cut into each other. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to change the fill color. I set my stroke to have no stroke color, and I will draw a rectangle over top of this circle. Now, if I were to switch to my selection tool and move the rectangle, you'll notice that the circle was actually cut into. Likewise, if I grab the circle and I move it over the rectangle, and then I click off the circle, and then I click back on the circle again to select it and move it, the circle has cut into the square. If you're not used to this, this can be very frustrating. However, once you're familiar with this behavior, you can use it to your advantage. If you don't want shapes to cut into one another, you will need to create multiple layers. So I'm going to create 2 layers. On the second layer, make sure that it's selected. I can now drag a rectangle over top of this circle. And if I were to select either of those shapes, I can move them without damaging the other shape. I'm going to clean the canvas up a little bit and just have this shape right here. I want to show you a couple other tricks that we can use the selection tool for. If I hover the selection tool over a shape that I don't have selected, and I hover it over a point, you'll notice that the cursor changes to show a little corner. That's indicating that I can grab that corner and move it. I can also hover my selection tool over any edge, and you'll notice that it turns into a curve. I can click and drag to add a curve to any part of a stroke. You may be wondering, what is the difference between a fill and a stroke? I'm going to select a stroke color, and I'll grab the line tool, and I will drag out a line. Now this looks a little funny because it's still using that ragged line style. I will change that to solid. If I were to switch to my subselection tool A and select, you'll notice that the points of a line do not indicate the perimeter of a shape. Instead, the points are simply connected. The points are simply connected to form the stroke. Now, my stroke weight, if I were to select this, my stroke weight is set to about 16. Maybe I'll set that exactly to 16. And what that means is around the points that make up this stroke, there are 16 pixels that go out from either side. Around that endpoint also, we've got a full 16 pixel radius. Now if I want my end caps to my strokes to be different, I can change those in the properties panel. So I can change the cap to be square instead of rounded. Also, if you have any corners in your line, you can change how those corners are interpolated as well. So let's say I want to add a corner to this. I'm going to, under the pen tool, find the add anchor point tool. And if I have a line selected, I can hover that tool over it and click to add a new point. Hit A to switch to your subselection tool, and then click on just that point and you can move it. Now select your stroke, and you'll notice that if you have a corner in your stroke, clicking on it only selects a segment of it. If you want to select any connected strokes, you double click with the selection tool. And I want to show you how we can change the way that corner is being drawn. Down here where it says join in the properties panel, we can change that from round to miter or to bevel, and we'll get different results. Okay, one of the most powerful tools that we have in Flash is the pen tool. So pen tool shortcut is P. We can use it to click multiple times to create a shape. If you click on the starting point, it will close the shape to make it self-contained. I don't like the way those corners have miters on them, or bevels. I'm going to select the whole stroke, and I'll change that back to a round join. Oops, there we go. If I want to add some fill, I would just go grab my spill bucket here and select a fill color and spill in some paint. If it refuses to drop in a fill color, then you have a hole in the stroke somewhere. It might not look like it, but you probably do somewhere. Let's talk a little bit more about what the pen tool can do. If while drawing the shape you click and hold, you can drag out Bezier handles for that anchor point. Hopefully you've worked with the pen tool before, but if you haven't, here are a couple tips. Notice that these two Bezier handles, when I move them, they are locked 180 degrees from each other. What this does is it creates a smooth curve that passes through this anchor point. If you don't want a smooth curve, we're going to need to change to our Convert Anchor Point tool, shortcut C. With the Convert Anchor Point tool, if I click on any Bezier handles and I drag them, they are no longer locked to one another, and I can create a point that has two curves coming out of it. So the point is now on the edge of two curves instead of being in the middle of one curve. We can use this to create sharp points with curves extending out from them. If I want to change the interpolation of this point, let's say back to linear, I can just click on it with the Convert Anchor Point tool, and now there are no Bezier handles coming out of it. If I want to change it back to a smooth Bezier curve, I can click on the point and drag out a pair of new handles. Now remember, if you want to adjust this, don't use the Convert Anchor Point tool because that breaks these two handles. Instead, use the A subselection tool, and now we can manipulate how that curve passes through that point. Another tool that may be handy is this stroke width tool. So what it allows me to do is to click on any point in my stroke and set the width at that particular point. Having a stroke with a variable stroke weight, we can create much more interesting shapes. Finally, a couple pieces of navigation. If you haven't picked them up already, you can use the zoom tool to zoom in or out. Just hit the Z button and then click to zoom in. Hold Alt and click to zoom out. Of course, you can drag a marquee to zoom into a specific section. We can also zoom in or out by clicking this drop-down box over here. If you want to zoom out quickly to 100%, the fastest way that I know to do it is to double-click on the magnifying glass over here, and you get back to 100%. If you want to pan around the canvas, hold down spacebar and click and drag. So that's especially helpful when you're zoomed in. Okay, hopefully you spent some time doing some illustration here in Flash, but now I want to move on to showing you the animation tools in Flash. We're just going to take a look. So in order for us to animate something, we need it to be an object. Remember, what I have here is a shape. In this case, it is a stroke, but fills and strokes, we'll just call them collectively shapes. I need to convert this into an object. And in Flash, we call those objects symbols. So this has to be a symbol. There are different symbol types. I'm going to use a type called a movie clip. So I'm going to select everything that I want to be in my movie clip, and I'm going to hit F8, or you can go up to, where is it? Modify, convert to symbol. So F8, I'm going to pick a name for the symbol. I'll call it thing, since I don't really know what this is. It's a little abstract. And then remember, for type, we're going to choose movie clip. The registration allows me to pick where inside of this movie clip do we want the anchor point. And I'm just going to put the anchor point right in the middle. We don't need to worry about these advanced options. So as long as we've named it and we've got our type set to movie clip, we are good to go. Hit OK. And now there's this blue box being drawn around this shape. This shape is now a symbol, so we cannot edit it directly. So if I were to grab my brush tool and draw over it, we do not have that issue we had earlier with the shapes cutting into one another. So when we created this symbol, it actually put the symbol in the library. What that means now is this is a prefab. I can go ahead and drag out multiple things, and I can adjust them individually. Movie clips have their own set of properties. So with a movie clip selected, find the Properties panel. We can set a movie clip's position. We can scale it up or down by changing its width or height. Under Color Effect, we can actually apply like a filter over it. So if I go to Style, I can say Tint and pick a color. And now I've just tinted that movie clip. If you want to make a movie clip transparent, we can set that under Color Effect as well. Go to Alpha, and you can drag down the alpha on that so that we can see through it. Movie clips are very powerful. Now, if we want to go back and edit the contents of any symbol, of any movie clip, we can do that very easily. You can, in the library, double-click on the definition for this symbol, and now we are inside of the symbol, and we're at a place where we can edit it once again. To get back out of the symbol, we have to look up here in this edit bar. What we now have inside of the symbol is this trail of breadcrumbs. The trail of breadcrumbs tells us where we are if we are nested inside of multiple movie clips. So if I want to go back to my main scene, just click where it says Scene 1. You'll notice that editing the definition of this symbol actually changed every instance of it. Another way to edit the contents of any symbol is to double-click on an instance of it in our canvas here. So I'm going to double-click on this, and now I'm inside the symbol. You'll know that you're inside of it because everything else kind of goes a little transparent, and now we see the breadcrumbs up here again. So we are inside of the thing symbol. If I edit this symbol, it's kind of cool because I can see all of the other instances of the symbol changing. Okay, so now that we've got an understanding of what these symbols are, let's go ahead and add some animation. To animate a symbol, it has to be on a layer all by itself. So right now, these four symbols, these four movie clips, are on layer 8 together. For this example, I'm just going to delete all but one of the symbols. Okay, so now this layer has only one symbol on it. What I'm going to do is, first of all, clean up my layers. I'll delete layer 1, and I want to name this something other than layer 8. So just double click on it, and I name the layer My Animation. Okay, so in order for us to have animation, something has to change over time. So at frame 1, this is what our canvas looks like. But maybe at frame 20, it needs to look like something else. So right now I can't advance the playhead at all because there are no additional frames in our timeline. Why don't we select frame 20 and add frames between 1 and 20. I'm going to right click and choose Insert Frame. Now the keyboard shortcut for that is F5, so just select frame 20 and hit F5. Now I can move the playhead wherever I want. Notice that the first frame has a little black circle on it. That means that this frame is a keyframe. any frames that come after it will look exactly the same as the keyframe. So if I put the playhead on frame 15 and I make some adjustments, what I've done is I've actually edited frame 1, the keyframe, and all of the following frames look the same. Now if I actually want frame 1 and frame 15 to look different, I can select frame 15, right-click, and choose Insert a new keyframe. Keyboard shortcut for that is F6. So select frame 15 and hit F6. Now, if I change the content on any frame between 1 and 15, it looks a certain way, and then at frame 15, it looks different. We can use this technique to create cell animation, where we essentially just draw a different picture on each frame. But I want to show you how to take advantage of interpolation by using keyframe animation. So what I'm going to do is right-click on the keyframe on frame 15 and choose Clear Keyframe. Alright, what I'm going to do is tell Flash to turn these frames from 1 to frame 20 into a keyframe animation. And in Flash we call that a tween. We call it a tween because Flash is going to interpolate all of the keyframes between any two keyframes. So right-click in this area and choose Create Motion Tween. Notice that the color of the frames has changed. It's now, I want to say, blue. Okay, so now what we can do is we can move our playhead to a particular frame, and we can change and we can transform this particular symbol. So if I click on the symbol and move it and let go, notice that we've got a little diamond on frame 20. What I've done is I've set a position keyframe on that frame. If I scrub through my timeline, notice we've got an animation. There are animation buttons down here. I can hit play and I'll get a preview of my animation. I should point out, however, that this real-time playback may not be at the right frame rate. So remember, my document here is set to 24 frames per second. If I want to get an idea of how this animation will really look, I need to compile my project. So to do that, we hit Control-Enter. Notice that our timeline loops. So once it gets to frame 21, it actually jumps back to frame 1, and it's just going to keep looping over and over again. In addition to position, we can change other properties as well. I'm going to, on frame 20, switch to my transform tool. The free transform tool keyboard shortcut is Q. I can shrink this down, and now that's part of my animation. Hey there, everybody. I've had some technical difficulties. This is actually going to be the third or fourth time that I've recorded this section of the video, so I'm about to pull my hair out. The advantage is I'm warmed up and ready to go. So let's go ahead and I'm going to draw a rectangle. And I just want to get caught up here. F8 to turn that into a symbol. I'll call it square. There we go. And you'll notice it's over here in my library, this movie clip. And I want to animate it, so I'm going to go out to frame 24, hit F5. I've got 24 frames of animation here. I want to turn this into a motion tween, so I'm going to right-click and say Create Motion Tween. I'm going to position my playhead at frame 24, and then I'll just change the position of this square, and we've got ourselves a tween. Right now we're tweening between two different values for the X position and Y position of this object. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we can also tween other properties. I'm going to change to the free transform tool, that's Q, and I can change its scale. And by doing that, I've set a property for scale. And let's say I go to frame 10 and I want to maybe scale it up on frame 10. It's just going to add a keyframe for the scale property, not for the position or rotation or anything like that. So speaking of rotation, let's get this guy to rotate now. What I want to do is have it rotate a full 360 degrees. So I'm going to go to frame 24. And using the free transform tool, I'm going to click and circle around this square, and I'll maybe hold down Shift, make sure it snaps. Okay, there we go, a full 360 degrees. Here's the problem. When I use the free transform tool and I rotate it 360 degrees, Flash sees that as 0 degrees. 0 degrees is exactly the same as 360. So we've got ourselves a bit of a problem. If I double click on this tween, I access this motion editor and I can look at these properties like rotation and location X, Y, scale X and Y. And it used to be that you could edit these properties directly. So what I mean by that is you could come in here and I could type in a value for rotation. The folks over at Adobe thought it was smarter to hide that. So the ability to change the rotation is now hidden in the transform panel. So select the object, make sure your playhead is where you want to set the keyframe, find the transform panel, and where it says rotate, you can type in 360 degrees. Now, if you look at this graph, our rotation goes from 0 to 360, and sure enough, it rotates a full circle. Let's say I want to add some easing to this. That's easy enough to do. I'm going to Alt-click on these points to turn them into Bezier points. And if I Alt-click and drag out, oh, hold on, Alt-click, it should turn, it looks round. And then if I Alt-click and drag, there we go, I pull out that Bezier handle. And if I hold Shift, it will try to lock that horizontally. I'm going to do the same for the top. Oh, no, okay. Come on. Yeah, I liked Flash more back when this was easy to do. Okay, there we go. So now what's going to happen is the rate at which it speed, the rate at which it rotates, it's going to start off not rotating. It's going to pick up speed, and then it's going to slow down to a stop. Now when I say slow down, I mean the rotation is going to slow down, not its change in position. Because if we look up here at position, this position X value maintains a linear velocity. I know it's a linear velocity because the slope of this line stays consistent. It never changes. So if we want the object to slow down and speed up its spatial horizontal movement here, I can do the same thing. I'm going to Alt-click and then Alt-click and drag out this Bezier handle. I'll do the same up here. And just try to get that so that it starts off horizontal and it ends horizontal. Now it picks up speed and then it slows down to a stop. I know that it worked because these little points here on this motion path, at the edges they're close together. Okay, and those little points correspond to the center of this square. So the center of the square doesn't move very much, and then as it's moving along, it starts moving faster because these points are further apart. And then once it gets near the end, they're close together again, so it's slowing down to a stop. If I hit Control-Enter, we can preview that. That's a pretty neat animation. You can also, in the motion editor, we can add eases by clicking down here at Add Ease. These are pre-built eases that we can customize a little bit, so we can add a stop and start ease. Stop and start is the ease in and ease out, very similar to what I just did. Let's maybe grab a medium, and now it's being applied to my scale graph. So I've got my scale here, and then this dotted line is the scale after this ease has been applied. Now I've only applied it to scale X, so you'll notice that we're getting some weird squashing over here at the end because this ease is not being applied to scale Y. If I want to apply it to both, I can actually, I'll go to scale X and I'll take it off by saying no ease. I'll just select scale, and with scale we'll say start and stop, medium, and we can even change the amount of easing. For some reason, the default here is for it to start fast, slow down. Remember, horizontal is slow. Slow down, and then pick up speed. To me, that seems backwards for most animations. So instead, I'm going to drag this number down so that it's negative. There we go. You can adjust how much it curves. So now it starts off slow, it picks up speed, and then it slows down. Now, that ease is being applied to the scale. So the rate at which the scale changes, it starts out slow, picks up speed, and then slows down at the end. Now, here's the thing that's throwing this entire animation off. The scale actually has this extra point here in the center. And if I were to hand keyframe this, I would not use this stop and start ease. These eases are very limited. You'll use most of these only if you've got a point at the end of your animation and a point at the a point at the beginning and a point at the end with no points in between. So just a word of caution there. These eases aren't as great as you might think. You might be tempted to use them. So let's say I did want to ease this scale. I could Alt-click and drag out a horizontal line here. Alt-click and drag out a horizontal line here. And I'm also going to Alt-click and drag out. Okay, I guess it doesn't do both sides at the same time. That's fine. Okay, so now what I have going on here with the scale X is it starts off slow, picks up speed, and then as it hits this extreme upper value, it actually slows down into it, and then picks up speed and goes in the opposite direction. Okay, so that's probably more of the kind of animation that you want. Usually 9 times out of 10, you want these what I'm going to call like peaks and valleys. You want those to be horizontal. So you want to add these Beziers and then just flatten them out like that. So give that a shot if you're doing any animation in Flash. I want to show you some animations that I've done in Flash, so I have those in a separate file. Notice that in this particular file, there's nothing in the main timeline, so you might think that it's empty, but that's not the case. Over here in the library, I do have these other movie clips. I've got a folder for body parts. These are movie clips that are just an eye, a hand, a hat, a head, or legs. And then I've got these other movie clips, like idle, jump, and run. I'm going to show you run. So I just drag a copy of that run movie clip out to this main timeline. And it only exists on the main timeline for 1 frame. So if I hit play, we're not going to see anything. However, inside of this movie clip, there is a timeline in there. So I didn't point it out earlier, but every movie clip has its own timeline, its own layers, okay? Its own anchor point. It's this little cross right here in the middle. So just like in After Effects, how we can create compositions and then nest them inside one another, we can do the exact same thing in Flash, except in Flash they're not called compositions, they're called movie clips. Okay, so you're going to want to start thinking about how we can create sophisticated animation by nesting movie clips inside one another. So in this example, I'll just go ahead and hit Control Enter. We can see that even though the main timeline is just staying on 1 frame, the movie clip that is on that frame has a timeline inside of it. And that particular timeline is 9 frames long, and once it gets to the end, it loops back to the beginning. Even though the main timeline is just sitting on 1 frame, the nested animations continue to loop as well. Now this animation isn't as smooth as it should be because I created it in Adobe CS6, and in Adobe CC it has totally messed up my animation, and that's because the motion editor is not the same as it used to be, and everything's all jacked up in here. So thanks Adobe for that. Okay, so I don't have that much more to say about animation because I just want you to go try it, but there is something cool you can do in Flash. I've got this run animation, and let's say I want to export it out of Flash and bring it into a game engine. I would want to create a sprite sheet for that. The way to do that is I can actually right-click on any movie clip, and I can go to Generate Sprite Sheet, and it's pretty cool. It will take every frame of that movie clip and it will make a little sprite and then put them all together in a sprite sheet. You may have been wondering why I've got these little squares around my animations. Well, those squares are for alignment. What I was going to do is after exporting these sprite sheets, I would take them into Flash, or excuse me, I would take them into Photoshop, and then I would erase these little squares. Okay, so really these squares are just here as guides inside of Flash. So, fun stuff there. Next up, I want to show you how we can stop thinking about Flash as an animation tool and start thinking about it as an interactive tool. I want to show you how you can create a slideshow. So I'm going to close this project, and I want to show you, I've created a Photoshop file of an application, and this is just a wireframe of an application. So it's just a prototype. It's not supposed to be representative of the final graphics or anything like that. So in this app, I have a home page, I have an events page, and I have a locations page. There's also a tab bar down here at the bottom with 3 buttons on it. I've already exported all of these assets as PNG files. So what I'm going to do is come in here to Flash. I'll create a new ActionScript 3 file, and I'm going to import those images into the library. File, import, import to library. I'm going to select all of these images and say Open. And now that they're in here, I can drag them out onto the canvas. So I'll just grab the home image and drag it out here. And you will probably notice that these are PNG files like I mentioned. However, we have some JPEG artifacting going on. Now I thought PNGs were lossless, so this concerns me greatly. I don't know what's going on. Well, that's not true. I do know what's going on, and I'll tell you. What Flash is going to do is when I compile my project into an executable file, into a runtime file, it's going to take any of these images and embed them inside of that file. So because we're doing some embedding, Flash has assumed I want a small file size, because Flash used to be used to create websites, so you'd want everything to be really small. So the default action here is when I import images, it's going to recompress them as JPEGs. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is I want to batch this operation on all of these PNG files. So I'm going to select all the PNG files, and then I'm going to right click and say Properties. Now if I only selected one, this screen would look a little bit different. Properties. Okay. In here we can set our compression, and we can also allow smoothing. Okay, allow smoothing is turned on by default, which I do like, but you'll notice that the compression is set to JPEG by default. And even though it's set to JPEG, you can also set the quality of that JPEG compression. So if you really want to save a space, bring that down to a quality of 1, and I hit enter, but I didn't mean to hit enter. Over here we've got this preview, and a quality of 1 is horrible. If I turn this up, I can bring it up to 100. And that's better, but I still don't want to use JPEG. So what I'm going to do is select all of these images, right click, choose Properties, and I want to set all of them to use PNG. So I'm going to change the compression setting on all 9 of these bitmaps. So I'm going to check compression and then choose PNG, lossless. Hit OK, and now this image looks beautiful. Okay, so I designed this app to be 16 by 9, or actually 9 by 16. So I need to change my canvas a bit. I'm probably not going to do it at this full 720 by 1280 resolution. So maybe I'll scale this down, and I want to control exactly what size it is. So with the image selected, in Properties, I can set the width to be exactly 360. And I just locked the width and height, so height actually came down to 640 when I did that. I will make my canvas 360 by 640. And then I want to align this with my canvas, so I'll use the Align tool, make sure Align to Stage is selected, and I can choose Align Left and Align Top. So now when I compile, I've got this cool home screen for my app. What I want to do is have frame 2 on my main timeline be the events frame. So I'm going to go to frame 2 and hit F6. F6, remember, puts in a new keyframe. However, it copies the contents of the frame in front of it. So here on frame 2, I also have the home page. Now I could erase it, I could hit delete and pull in the other bitmap, but there's actually a handy dandy shortcut. If I get this bitmap back where I wanted it, and I have it selected, in the Properties panel I can click Swap, and I can choose a different image from my library to swap it out with. So, events.png. And then on frame 3, hit F6. This is where we want our locations image. And here's my app. I have frame 1 is my home page, frame 2 is my events page, and frame 3 is my locations page. So you can think of this as an app, you can think of it as a website, or you can think of it as a slideshow. You know, it doesn't really matter too much what you think, how you think of it, because the results will be pretty much the same. If I were to compile this, Flash is going to think of it as an animation. And at 24 frames per second, it's going to play this animation, these 3 frames, and it's going to loop through them. Okay, so really all I have to do in order to convert this from an animation into a slideshow is tell it to stop. Tell Flash to stop playing. So in order to do that, I actually have to insert some code into one of these frames. Now, what I like to do is I like to have all the code on a separate layer. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to name the old layer Screens. I'm going to name the new layer Code. Now in Flash, we program in a language called ActionScript, specifically ActionScript 3. So sometimes people, if they do this, they'll name that layer Action or Actions. I don't know. I like code. Whatever you want to name it, doesn't matter. And what I'll do is on frame 1, I'm going to attach some code that tells our animation to stop. So on frame 1, we have to pull up the Actions panel. I have the Actions panel right here, but if you don't have it, there are some convenient ways to get to it. F9 will pull up the Actions panel. However, I'm not going to hit it because F9 will stop my screen recording software, as I found out earlier. However, right-click and Actions is an easy way to get to it as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a function, and the function is called stop. So, like in most languages, what we do is we type the name of the function, and then if it's a function, it has to be followed with 2 parentheses, an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. And all of our lines of code, all of our statements have to end in a semicolon. So I'll just put a semicolon there at the end. And that's all the code I need. So I'm calling the stop function. And if I go back to the timeline, you'll notice that there is now a little A right above the empty keyframe circle here on this layer for frame 1. That A tells me there's some action script on that frame. So now if I hit Control Enter to run my project, Flash no longer thinks of my project as an animation. It just sits there on frame 1. So this is great. Now what we have to do is we have to drop in some buttons and then add a little bit of code to tell the buttons where to go when they're clicked. So let's create this little tab bar down here. I'm going to add a new frame, or excuse me, a new layer, and I'll call this layer tab bar. On frame 1, I'm going to find button 1 on, button 2 off, and button 3 off. Okay, so these are obviously twice as large as they should be. By the way, I'm going to lock the background, so the screen, I'm going to lock that so that I don't accidentally select it. Whew, okay, so let's see. If I select these 3 buttons, can I do that in the Transform panel? I think I can. So in the Transform panel, I'm going to make sure my X and Y dimensions for scale are locked, and I'll just type in 50. And if I have all 3 buttons selected, it'll scale them down at the same time. And you should be able to just kind of snap those into place. However, your mileage may vary. If I compile and run it, I can just double check to make sure it looks right. And it looks good to me. Now you'll notice that when you look at the timeline, that these buttons actually extend for all 3 frames. And in fact, they're identical on all 3. So remember, if I were to come here to frame 3 and swap out the locations off for locations on, I'll just move it over here, that actually does that for all 3 pages. So what we want to do is on frame 2 have a new keyframe, so F6, and on frame 3 have a new keyframe, so F6 there as well. On frame 2, I'm going to swap the home button 1 on with button 1 off, and I'll swap button 2 off with button 2 on. Okay, and then on frame 3, I'll do the same thing. No. What did I do? Oh, my artwork is wrong. I better fix that. Okay, this is a great opportunity for me to show you another feature in Flash. Since I've swapped out this original artwork, what I can do is I can right click in here and I can say update. And it's going to prompt me, ask me if I want to re-import that file. I'll say update, and just like that, it brought in the new updated artwork. So this is a great way of working. You may have actually worked in Flash before, or you might find that you can import Photoshop files, or you can import Illustrator files. A word to the wise: never import Photoshop files into Flash, for several reasons. It messes up your artwork, it messes up your alpha channels, and it does not allow you to very easily right-click and update the artwork over here in the library. So just don't do it. From Photoshop, export your images to PNG files, and then just bring those PNG files here into Flash. Okay, so as I scrub through my main timeline, you'll notice that I now have 3 frames. I've got this home page, this events page, and this locations page, and each one has these cool looking buttons on it. What I have to do is I have to be able to refer to this piece of artwork in my code. And in order to do that, I have to give this piece of artwork a variable name. Okay, so just a name, just something I call it so that I can use it in my code. Now, I cannot give images names. Okay, I can only give symbols names. So just like before, I have to convert this into a movie clip or another symbol. Okay, so with this events button selected, I'm going to hit F8, and I'm going to, I guess I'll show you how to set up a new button. I could do movie clip, but I'm going to show you button. I'm going to call this BTTN underscore events. Over here in my library, I now have a new button called BTTN events, and I want to be organized, so real quick, create a folder for images. That's better. And I could create another folder for buttons. Okay, let's edit this button. If I double click on it, just like a movie clip, I go inside of the button and I can edit it. The cool thing with a button is that it's kind of like a movie clip. It has a timeline, but instead of having an infinite number of frames, it has 4 frames. There's an up frame, an over frame, a down frame, and a hit frame. So what I'm going to do is for the over frame, bring in some artwork. First I got to add a keyframe for over, and then I'm going to just swap this out, this button 2 off with button 2 on. Okay, so when the button is just up, it looks like this. And when the mouse is hovering over the button, it looks like this. In fact, if I hit Control Enter to test, we can verify that. Oh, that's cool. Now, not only does it change colors when I hover my mouse over it, but my cursor actually changes to a pointer, which is nice. It's another way that we can have a juicy feedback for whoever's using this app. Now I do want to point one thing out. This particular app is meant for a touch device, for like a phone, and phones don't typically have hover options for their buttons. But you know what? Since we'll probably just be using this on the computer, it's fine that that's there. The down frame here is what the button looks like when the mouse is over it and pushed down, when the button on the mouse is pushed down. And then the hit, well, the hit actually defines the area of the button that is clickable. So if I were to add a keyframe to hit, and let's say just maybe put a circle in there, we will never see this circle. But instead, that circle is the only area of this button that we can hit. Now this is easier to, it makes more sense if I have onion skins turned on. So with onion skins turned on, I can see the other states of this button, and this button will only act like the mouse is over it if the mouse is over this circle. So if I compile it, I can show you what I mean. So my mouse is over the artwork of the button, but it's not hovering over the button. And if I move my mouse to where that circle would be, now I'm hovering over it. So that gives you a little bit more control. However, you don't typically need it unless you're doing something weird, like maybe you've got a button set up with text or something. and you're having an issue where the text, I'm going to say remove frame, where the text is not, clickable because there's like little holes in the text and whatnot. Okay, let's create another button. So locations, F8. I'm going to call it BTTN locations, and I want to edit that. I'm going to add a keyframe for the overstate, and I'm going to swap out the artwork for button 3 on, and then come back out here. And if you're having a hard time seeing my keyframes down here while I'm working on the timeline, I can actually make those larger. I can hit this flyout menu and I can say make those keyframes large. However, in CC they added this little rescaling of the timeline option down here, which is really nice. So I can scale that up, and that just makes working in Flash easier sometimes. Okay, so on our the first page of our app, we've got these 2 buttons, and what I want to do is just real quickly go over to these other 2 pages and make sure they have buttons as well. So here on page 2, I haven't created a home button yet, so I'm going to select the home image here and hit F8, and I'll call it BTTN_home, and I'll double click to edit, and on the second frame just right click, insert keyframe, and with the keyframe selected we say swap button 1 on, and there we go. Now in our library we've got 3 buttons. We've got a button for events, a button for home, and a button for locations. So what I'm going to do is here on the second page I'm just going to get rid of this bitmap, this image for locations, and I'm going to replace it with my button for locations. Remember, I have to have buttons if I want to be able to attach code to the buttons. If I want to work with them in my code. Okay. Wunderbar. I'm going to go back to the first page, and what I want to do is give these buttons some names. So this first button right here, I will come in here and I'll call it BTTN1. So what I did there real quickly was I selected the symbol, the instance of the symbol here, and then in the properties panel I went up to the top where it says instance name. That instance name is the variable name by which we're going to refer to this button in the code. So I called this one BTTN1, and I'm going to call this one BTTN2. Now that these have those variable names, those instance names, I can use them in my code. So I'm going to select my code for frame 1 and go to the actions panel. I'm going to say BTTN1. And then if I want to access a property or a method of that object, that button object, I can do so using the access operator, and it's just a period. Now, if I want to set a property, let's say alpha, to 0, I can do so easily enough. So when we get to frame 1 here, it's going to call the stop function, and then it's going to set button 1's alpha property to 0, which, as you can probably guess, will make it transparent. It's there, but I can't see it. So each of these objects have all kinds of properties that we can manipulate and methods that we can call. Okay, one of those methods is add event listener. Okay, add event listener is going to allow us to tell Flash to listen for an event to happen to this button. Now, there are all kinds of different events that could happen to objects here in our code, but specifically we want Flash to listen for when there's a click event. Okay, so when the user clicks on this button, that's an event, and we want to listen for it and then do something when that click happens. Okay, so the add event listener method, it takes two parameters. The first one is what kind of event we're listening for, and we're going to be listening for a mouse event, and the specific kind of mouse event is click. So mouse event dot click. And the second parameter we pass in here to add event listener is the name of the function we want to call when that event happens. So we're going to create our own function, and then we're going to make sure that that function is called when this button is clicked. So why don't we just call this function go to page 2. And then of course, because this is a function, this add event listener is a function, it has to have an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis, and then a semicolon at the end. Now, in order for my code to work, I have to have a function called go to page 2. So I'll go down at least one line of code, and I'll declare a new function. I'll say function go to page 2. I have to type it exactly the same way I typed it up here. And then because it's a function, it has to have an open and closed parenthesis. And then what it should have is it should also have a return type defined. It doesn't have to in order to compile, but it should. So colon void. That keyword void means that this function isn't going to return any information. If you don't know what that means, that's okay, but maybe consider going and looking it up sometime, what return types are. Now, in order for this function to work, we do have to modify it a little bit. The way event listeners work in Flash is the event object that fires this function has to be passed into this function. It's just part of the protocol. And what that event type is going to be is it's going to be the same type that we used up here. So we are listening for a mouse event, and that's going to be the exact kind of object we have to pass in here. So I'm going to pass in a variable, let's call it E, and its data type is mouse event. Now this syntax might look a little weird. If you're not used to Flash, when you declare variables or functions, you always do the variable name, then the data type. So if I wanted to make a variable up here, I would say var for variable. Okay, var is a keyword, means I'm defining a variable. Let's call the variable hello, and let's set its data type to integer. And then I can set it equal to some integer, let's say 42. That's how you would declare a new variable named hello of data type integer, and then we set it equal to 42. Now if we want to test that that works, we can call a function. If you have worked in C# before, you might have called console.writeLine, and what that would do is it would output some piece of information to the console so that we can read it. I can do the same thing in here. Instead of having to type out console.writeLine, however, the function is just called trace. So we call trace, and then we pass in any information we want to trace out. So for example, I could pass a string that says hello world. If I hit Control Enter, it compiles my project, it runs my project, and then in the output panel, it's going to output anything that I trace. So similarly, I can actually trace out the value of a variable by just typing the name of the variable inside the trace. So because hello equals 42, when I call trace hello, it should print out 42. And sure enough, it does. Now let's do something a little bit different here. Let's make it so that it prints out 42 only when we click this events button. Okay, so button 1 has an event listener on it. When it is clicked, okay, it's going to call go to page. So if I want to have the trace command called, I should need to put that in the go to trace function. So now if I compile my code, Control Enter, here's my project, and when I click on this button, the output panel now prints 42. In fact, I can keep clicking on it and it will keep printing out 42. Okay, it's just calling the function multiple times. Okay, so I went off on a tangent there a little bit, but I did want you to, maybe understand what you're writing here. I'll just get rid of that variable, I'll get rid of the trace. Okay, how do we actually get Flash to go to a different frame? Well, it's pretty simple. There's just a function called goTo, and there's two different ways we can call it. We can call goTo and stop, And what that will do is it will go to a specific frame and stop on that frame, or there's go to and play. Go to and play will go to a specific frame and then continue playing the animation. Now, since we're not doing an animation, I'm going to call go to and stop, and this is a function, so open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and then a semicolon. Now, I'm not actually done with this line of code because some piece of information has to go inside of these parentheses. And if you stopped and thought about it, what do we actually need to know in order to call this function? Well, this function tells Flash to go to a specific frame. So what Flash needs to know is which frame does it need to go to? If you ever are looking for the parameter list of a function, you can just erase and rewrite that opening parenthesis, and you'll notice that the parameter list is printed here for you. So we have to pass in a frame, and its data type is object. And the reason why it's object is we could actually pass in the number of a frame, or we could pass in a string because we can add tags to frames. So I want to tell it to go to frame 2 of my main timeline. So I'm going to say go to and stop 2. Let's try it out. Okay, so let's click on events, and just like that I go to frame 2. Oh, that's exciting. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing here with button 2. It's a little confusing. Maybe I should have called this button 2 and this button 3. But maybe it's too late now. So notice that when I click on other things, it's not too late, but notice when I click on other things, my actions disappear. And that's because this actions panel shows me contextually different actions based on what I have selected. And it looks like here I'm on frame 2. So what I want to do is make sure I've got this frame selected that has my code on it. And if I want to make sure that this code doesn't disappear, I can do so. Oh shoot, they changed it in CC. Yeah, they did. Well, you used to be able to. You used to be able to have tabs down here and then just pin tabs so that they wouldn't close. But that's gone. So ignore everything I just said. Let's go ahead and make it so that when we click button 2, it goes to frame 3. So I'm just going to copy this line of code. Button 2. Button 2 should go to page 3. Now, we need to have a function called go to page 3. Okay. So, button 2, we add an event listener. When the mouse is clicked on that button, we're going to call the go to page 3 function. The go to page 3 function calls the go to and stop function. And it tells it to go to frame 3. So let's go ahead and hit Control Enter, and I want to give it a try. Cool. I can go to locations. Now let's try going to events. Doesn't work anymore. The reason why it doesn't work is because on frame 3, this button right here, this events button, no longer is the same button as what's here on frame 1. I know that's kind of confusing, but if you think of it this way, frame 1, these buttons exist on this frame right here, and only this frame. When I come over here to frame 2, it's an all new keyframe. So these are all new buttons on there. Even though the artwork is the same, or they're different instances of the same symbol in the library. Okay. Furthermore, you can verify that by clicking on this button and seeing that it does not have an instance name. Well, what we would want to do is come through here and give each of these an instance name. So I'm gonna. Yeah, it's a weird way of doing it, but I do want to be a little bit organized with my code. So I'm going to go back and rename these. I'm going to, on each of these frames, call this button 1, this button 2, and this button 3. So this is button 2, this button 3, and then my code should reflect that. So when I click button 2, it should go to page 2, and when I click button 3 now, it should go to page 3. Okay, I guess that wasn't so bad. If you haven't saved yet, now would be a great time to save. demo. Okay, I'm going to go in my timeline over here to frame 2, and I'm going to select this home button, and I'm going to call this home button BTTN1, and because again 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to add some code. I'm going to add an event listener. On button 1, I'm going to add an event listener for a click, and it's going to call the go to page 1 function. So the go to page 1 function should go to and stop to page 1. All right, let's compile and see what happens. It looks like I have a runtime error. You know it's a runtime error when it pops up in the output panel, but not in the compiler errors panel. So, what is it trying to tell me? Cannot access a property or method of a null object reference. The error is happening on frame 1 in my main timeline. Okay, so let me tell you how to read this, okay? Cannot access a property or method. That tells me I'm using an access operator. Remember, that's the little period. I'm using it on an object that's null. Okay, so there's a variable here that I'm using the access operator on that is null. Well, I'll just tell you what it is. It's button 1. Okay, so here's the access operator. This is the method that I'm trying to access. But this right here, this button 1, this variable doesn't point to anything. But that doesn't seem right, because just a moment ago I called this button 1. Well, here's what's happening. On frame 1, this button right here, it doesn't exist yet. This button only exists on frame 2. So I cannot write any code that uses a button that doesn't exist yet. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So what I have to do is I have to write code that runs on frame 2 if I want to be able to access these two buttons right here. So in order to do that, I have to have a new keyframe, because my code can only be attached to keyframes. So on frame 2, I'm going to hit F6, and on frame 3, I'll do the same thing, F6. And now I've got 3 separate keyframes for my code layer. Back on frame 1, I'm going to delete, or maybe just comment this out right here. And I'm going to copy these 2 lines of code, go back to frame 2, and paste those 2 lines of code. I'm going to modify them a little bit. This is called button 1, and I'm going to call this button 3. And now what I'm going to do is in my code, I'm going to say button 1 should call the go to page 1 function, and button 3 should call the go to page 3 function. Okay, so here we are. I'm on page 1, frame 1. If I click events, I go to frame 2. If I click home, I go back home. And I can just go back and forth between home and events. And if I'm on events and I click locations, I'll go to frame 3. But I can't get back yet. Oh, I guess Oh, interesting. No, now I can't get back. Okay, so there are a couple weird things going on here. First of all, you might be like, hey, wait a minute, why does this work? There are no functions in here. Well, when you declare a variable or a function, it continues to exist in that timeline where it was created. So these 3 functions that are declared here on frame 1, they continue to exist everywhere in this main timeline. So I do not have to redeclare these functions on frame 2 or frame 3. And again, the same thing is if I declared a variable in here and I wanted to use it anywhere in this timeline, I only have to declare it once. So something to think about. I'm going to go to frame 3. I'm going to call this BTTN1. I'm going to call this one BTTN2. And let's go back to frame 2, and I just want to copy these 2 lines of code. Go to frame 3, and I'll paste those lines of code. I want to change this to say button 2 goes to page 2. Okay. And just like that, we now have a slideshow, and in that slideshow, we can jump around from any frame to any other frame we want. So I would encourage you to play with this. Heck, I'd encourage you to actually figure out how you could make a choose your own adventure game by only using this code right here. Maybe you could figure out how to add in some variables. Okay. So anyway, go ahead and give it a shot. Try to create something more sophisticated. You could, let's say on the events page, you can make it so that you could click on an event and it would take you to, a different frame, a specific frame that just shows that event. Feel free to get creative and figure out what you can do by nesting movie clips inside one another. I hope this was helpful. Go create something cool.